Welcome back, my dearest friends and friends. Welcome back in my next lecture, Salient Feature of Environmental Law and Biodiversity Laws. So, I'm Professor Urus Ilyas, working in Department of Wildlife Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University. And today in this class, we'll be discussing about the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, Part 1. So, Wildlife Protection Act is one of the act which covers all the wildlife in it. Before that, we studied the CBD, Biodiversity Act 2002, and biodiversity includes wildlife as well as the flora and fauna of the kitchen garden and the outside the PAs, outside the jungle. So biodiversity means all living thing existing on the earth, while Wildlife Protection Act is meant only for wildlife. So it was made in 1972 to 1972. So Wildlife Protection Act is it was enacted by the Parliament of India on 9 September 1972, marking a pivotal moment in the country's environmental legislation. The Act represents a comprehensive legal framework designed to address the urgent need for wildlife conservation amid increasing threat from habitat loss, population loss because of poaching, and environmental degradation. It applies throughout India except Jammu and Kashmir, since it was UT, so it had separate act. So Wildlife Protection Act 1972 is a comprehensive legislation enacted by the Parliament of India on 9 September 1972. It provides protection to wild animals, birds and plants, and for matter connected with or ancillary or incidental thereto. The Act applies throughout India with the exception of J&K. So history, and let's talk about the historical background. So historical background, pre-independence, the British colony era was marked by policies focused on revenue and extensive hunting. So whatever conservation act we have, they all were to generate the revenue. So it was the production forestry, production conservation, so that can meet the need of the human being. So the British colony era was marked by policies focused on revenue and extensive hunting, which severely impacted India's wildlife and pushed several species towards extinction. Past independence, following independence, there was a growing awareness of the wildlife crisis. Key milestones, this led to early protection legislation through the extinction of the cheetah in 1952, highlighted the urgency. Cheetah is a very important species. It is a grassland species. Extinction of the cheetah means the grasslands are depleting, the shrinking. So the loss of cheetah, the extinction of cheetah, actually highlighted the urgency of this act. The discovery of an alarming decline in the tiger population in 1960s was a major turning point, leading to the formation of the Indian Board for Wildlife in 1970 to spearhead conservation effort. So post-independent realization, 1950s, first wildlife protection legislation in some states. In 1952, we had first wildlife protection legislation in some states, not all country. 1952 extinction of cheetah from India actually showed the urgency of the act. An alarming decline in tiger population in 1960 and 70, Government of India formed Indian Board of Wildlife. Why the act came into existence? Why was it needed? It's a very important question. By the early 1970s, the country was facing a massive species decline, with the tiger population having dropped by a shocking 95%. This was a direct result of several factors, including rapid deforestation, industrialization, leading to significant habitat loss. Obviously, when you are establishing an industry, you have to clear the land. So these were the main reason. The Unregulated hunting was there. The rampant commercial poaching and illegal wildlife trade involving important species and their body parts lead to several population decline of umbrella or apex species. Hunting and poaching. We know after the narcotics, the wildlife trade is the second largest trade in the world. So, because of that, the population was declining. Therefore, this law was a much needed step to save the country's rich biodiversity, rich wildlife. Continuing the last slide, let me shed some light from constitutional perspective that why the act was needed. The Wildlife Protection Act was needed because India's constitution provides a clear mandate for environmental and wildlife protection. And Article 48A, a directive principle of state policy, obligates the state to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Additionally, Article 51A, we have already discussed earlier, 51A within bracket G, establishes this as a fundamental duty for every citizen. The Act was a legislative response to fulfill these constitutional obligations, providing a legal framework to protect the country's biodiversity. So, that is why it was needed. Key terms used in this Act, there are several key terms defined the Act. Here will shed light on few most important ones, such as animals. Animal in the Act includes birds, reptiles, mammals, amphibians and their young and egg in the case of birds. Animal article means any article made from any captive and wild animal. For example, showpieces items made of elephant ivory, leather bags and belts made up of snake or crocodile skin. So these terms we are going to use. You can easily see in these pictures how we are using, like crocodile shoes. Crocodile leather shoes are in fashion. These are the extreme left is the ivory. So best carving is done on the ivory. There are many birds are being poached for or caught for captivation, for captive this thing, keeping the captivity in the houses. And hunting, capturing, killing, poisoning, trapping, injuring and possessing any wild animal, and every attempt to do so will treat as hunting according to this Act. So if you are going to touch the animal without the permission for any mean, it will be considered as the hunting. This illustration shows what all, this is the illustration, shows what all comes under the hunting definition: capturing birds, their eggs, their nest material. For example, bear weaver bird's nest. Usually people go, and when they find the bear weaver bird, small bird make beautiful nest, so they bring the nest home for the as a decoration piece. So collecting honey from the forest, poisoning a water body to catch the fishes, teasing animals, all comes under the hunting. So by this picture you can easily understand what all comes under the hunting. And trophy means this picture itself is explaining well. Trophy means the whole or any part of any captive or wild animal which has been kept or preserved by any means. That is the trophy. Wildlife includes any animal, including insects, aquatic and land vegetation that forms the habitat of wild animal. So this trophy and wildlife, these are further terms used in this Act. And the key objective of this Act, the slides outlines the fundamental objective of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. The Act serves multiple critical functions like protecting endangered species from extinction, conserving natural habitats, regulating hunting and illegal trade, establishing protected areas like national park, ensuring human treatment of animals. The Act set up various board and authorities to help with wildlife conservation, like the National and State Board of Wildlife, and BWLNS State Board of Wildlife, and the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau to enforce these provisions. The objectives work together to create a comprehensive framework for wildlife conservation in India. So, hunting of the wildlife, breaking the taboo. Wildlife Protection Act, however, deals with several aspects of wildlife conservation. Through the most important and primarily objective of the act is to deal with hunting of wild animal. Let us understand when and which circumstances the hunting is allowed. So, hunting of animal listed in Schedule 1 and 2 is totally prohibited. There are many schedules in Wildlife Protection Act. So, hunting of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 animals are totally prohibited unless granted by Chief Wildlife Warden. So, Chief Wildlife Warden grant the permission for the hunting if the animal is dangerous to human or irreparable disabled. For example, man-eating cases by tiger, leopard recently from Pilibhit Tiger Reserve in UP and Ranthambore, man-eating cases by tigress in Rajasthan. So, hunting permitted in self-defense or defense of other civilian. So, if you are killing the animal in your self-defense, then that is not considered illegal. As per the Act norms, any wild animal killed or wounded in defense rescue become government property. If you have killed any animal for the defense, then that animal is the property of the government. Okay. So, special provision, when can the rules be relaxed? So, Wildlife Protection Act is not completely rigid. It has practical expectation of real life situation. Self-defense is permitted when an animal immediately threatens human life. By this cannot be misused for plant hunting. Farmers can protect their crops from wildlife damages but need proper authorization first. Without authorization, you cannot kill the animal. The vermin declaration is controversial but necessary. So, authorities can permit hunting of problem animal like wild boar or nilgai that repeatedly destroy crops, but only for limited time and specific area. For research and education, scientists and filmmakers can get permit from the Chief Wildlife Warden. All these exceptions require poorer documentation and approval. So, these slides outline the fundamental structure of Wildlife Protection Act. The Act is divided into 7 chapters and 66 sections. So, the Act created the schedule which are crucial for categorization species based on their level of protection, ranging from those receiving absolute protection to those with regular hunting. The the government has amended this Act several times over the years. It is not that once the Act is made that is permanent. You can do amendment on time to time as per the requirement of the time. So, till date the government has amended the Act several times over the years, demonstrating the government's continued commitment to strengthening wildlife conservation in response to new challenges and changing need. The most recent amendment was happened in 2022. So, there were amendments in 1982, 91, 2002, 2006 and 2022. 22 is the latest amendment. So, chapter wise breakdown we can talk. I already mentioned there are so come to the chapter wise breakdown. The Wildlife Protection Act is systematically organized into 7 chapters we have already discussed, and covering all aspects of wildlife conservation. After preliminary definition in chapter 1, the Act establishes administrative authorities in chapter 2. Chapter 3 regulates hunting activities, while chapter 4 focuses on creating and managing protected areas like national park and sanctuaries. Chapter 5 addresses trade and commerce in wildlife. Chapter 6 deals with enforcement and penalties for offences, and chapter 7 contains miscellaneous provision ensuring comprehensive legal coverage. So, there are 7 chapters, and the key administrative bodies, the Wildlife Protection Act establishes a hierarchical administrative structure to implement its provision effectively. At the apex is the National Board for Wildlife at the central level, which provides policy guideline, and a state board for wildlife operate at the state level to address regional concern. So we have National Board for Wildlife to address the national national need, and every state has got the State Board of Wildlife that operates in the different states. The operational framework includes Chief Wildlife Warden, who oversees the state level implementations, Wildlife Warden, who manage district operations, and forest officers who work on ground to enforce the Act's provision daily. Two primary body from the backbone of wildlife governance in India, role of key organizations. So two bodies from the backbone of wildlife governance in India, the National Board for Wildlife, and National Board for Wildlife is chaired by the Prime Minister. Serve as the apex advisory body that shapes national conservation policies and provides strategic direction. At the state level, we have a State Board for Wildlife chaired by the respective Chief Minister of the state, and it adopts national guidelines to local context and address state-specific wildlife challenges. This two-tier structure ensures both centralized policy coherence and decentralized implementation flexibility. So we have two main bodies. One is the National Board of Wildlife and State Board of Wildlife. So beyond governance board, the Act establishes a specialized agency for specific conservation challenges. For example, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, that is called NTCA, focuses exclusively on protecting India's tiger reserve and their ecosystem. Then second is the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, combat organized poaching and illegal wildlife trade through intelligence and enforcement operations. And third is the Central Zoo Authority, NTCA, Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, and then third is the Central Zoo Authority, regulates and monitors zoos nationwide, ensuring proper animal welfare standards and contributing to conserve breeding programs. So role and responsibility, who does what? So the Act clearly delineates appointment power between central and state government to ensure effective implementation. The central government appoints the Director of Wildlife Preservation and supporting staff to oversee national level program and supporting staff to oversee national level program. It declares and modifies the species schedules, formulate national policies for wildlife conservation, help coordinate between interstate wildlife issues, also give approval for changes in boundary of the national parks, while the state government appoint chief wildlife wardens who lead state conservation efforts, wildlife warden for district level operation, and notably one honorable wildlife warden in each district to enhance community participation. Grant permission and license for specific activities like AARA machine mill, ARA machine mill. It look after day-to-day tasks of protected areas through its forest officials. This structure creates a comprehensive network from policy making to ground level enforcement, enabling effective wildlife protection across the country. So, central government power, chief wildlife warden, and the state government power has been defined. Protection level, there are different schedules, and under these schedules, the species are listed. So, Act uses a system of schedule to give different level of protection to species. Earlier, there were 6 schedules. After 2022 amendment, it was reduced to 4 schedules. The species earlier listed in those schedule 3 and 4 have now been redistributed into schedule 1 and 2. Now let's understand each schedule with appropriate example. Like schedule 1, the list provides the highest level of protection for animal species. It covers endangered species and strictly prohibited hunting and trade with the highest penalties for violation. For example, tiger, elephants, and lion. These are the Schedule 1 species. So you will have to pay a huge penalty if you are caught hunting this species. Come to the Schedule 2. Schedule 2 includes animal species that also receive a high degree of protection, though less than Schedule 1. Schedule 1 means highest. Schedule 2 is again high degree of protection, but as compared to Schedule 1, less. Though less than Schedule 1, hunting and trade are prohibited in these cases also, but the penalties for violation are lower than for Schedule 1. Species, for example, the schedule areas Assamese macaque, Himalayan black bear, jackal, Indian cobra, etc. You will get all these information on the MOEF website. Now come to the Schedule 3. There are 4 schedules. We have discussed 2 schedules. Schedule 3, the list is specifically for protected plant species. It provides for regulation of their cultivation, possession and trade, which generally require a license. Example of Schedule 3 are Bedoms, cycad, blue vanda, red vanda, cut. These all are plants of orchid. These all are orchids. So Schedule 1 and 2 includes the species, animal species, while Schedule 3 have the plant species. And Schedule 4 is earlier covered few less threatened species like monkey, few deer species. However, after 2022 amendment, the Schedule 4 was fully revised and species regulated under CITES were incorporated into this schedule. It gives the power to central government power to regulate the import, export and trade of CITES listed species. CITES is the Convention on International Trade. To control the trade, one convention took place and that is called CITES. So earlier CITES was not the part of Wildlife Protection Act. Now after the amendment of 2022, the CITES were incorporated in this schedule. It gives the power to the central government to regulate the import, export and trade of CITES listed species. So protected area management, like Wildlife Protection Act has a provision to create different types of protected area with different rules. We have already discussed this in our earlier classes. National park are the most strict. No human activities are allowed at all, not even cattle grazing, to keep nature completely undisturbed. The national park boundaries are clearly defined into core zone and buffer zone. Core zone are the zones where no tourist is allowed. Research work can be conducted here with prior approval of the competent authority, and that authority is the Chief Wildlife Warden. So these zones are primarily divided into beats, sections and the ranges, which are guarded by the forest guards. So beat, section and ranges are the management units, and these units have been different foresters, rangers, guards are assigned in these units to take care. So however, there are regulated tourism in certain zones and predefined routes of the park. For example, Corbett National Park in Uttarakhand, Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan. Whereas wildlife sanctuaries are a bit more flexible and allow some limited human activities as long as they don't harm the animal. Grazing is allowed in the buffer area of the sanctuary, regulated tourism in these beats section, and the ranges are the administrative boundary of the wildlife sanctuary. A section and the ranges are the administrative boundary of the wildlife sanctuary. For example, Katania Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary in UP. So, apart from national park and sanctuary, there are other types of protected areas too. They are the conservation reserves and the community reserves. Conservation reserves are government-owned land and connect different protected areas, creating safe passage for animals to move between habitats. These are created after talking with local communities. This is the conservation reserve. Then we have the community reserve. Community reserves are private or community land where local people volunteer agree to protect wildlife. And the tiger reserve get special attention with the own funding and management system because tiger are our national animal and need extra protection to survive. So apart from the national park and sanctuary, we have community reserves and the conservation reserve. So thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. We have already discussed small protected area management. Under that, we have discussed about the national park, sanctuary, community reserve, and conservation reserve. So basically, these things has been declared under the Wildlife Protection Act. So this is the one part of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. We will be continuing this part in our next lecture. So thank you very much and enjoy this lecture. I hope this is very, the notes has been made very clear. So just remember what is this. So thank you very much. We'll be meeting again.